Greetings, dear friends. My name is Vasyl Pekhno. I'm a Ukrainian journalist, and right now I'll be presenting a live fresh update on the Ukrainian battle map situation as of June, the 24th of June 2025. So please join and watch this video. Join with your likes, share it with your friends or somebody with whom you would like to share this video. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and also write your comments below the video. I'll start with some good news that Ukraine made new deep strikes inside the Russian Federation's territory. So let's start with this information, which was stated by the Ukrainian General Staff yesterday.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Well, I'll get started. So yesterday evening, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reported on an attack that actually took place from the day before yesterday to yesterday. This is an attack on an extremely important facility of the Russian occupiers, the Atlas plant in the Rostov region. It's an oil depot. It's an oil depot that was hit attention by special operations forces together with, and this is the most important part, missile troops and artillery. What is this about? And why am I placing so much emphasis and attention here? Because when the phrase hit by missile troops is mentioned, the immediate question arises, and what kind of missiles were used for the strike? Basically, when it comes to long-range missiles like these, let's take a look at the map to see where this Atlas plant is located. Well, not with us, but rather with the occupiers. It's in Kamensk-Shakhtinsky. Here is where it's located. In fact, from the line of contact, it's actually not that far. Well, give or take 200 kilometers. It's about 180 if you count from Toretsk. Of course, no missile launchers were stationed there. At the very least, it's about 250 kilometers. It was from no less than this kind of distance that our forces struck this enemy target. So what in Ukraine's arsenal, in our missile forces, can reach 250 kilometers? That could be a Neptune missile. Yes, the Neptune cruise missile has repeatedly struck ground targets and is used in a land-to-land mode. But every previous time Neptune struck enemy territory like this, what wording did the General Staff use in their reports? That units of the naval forces were involved in such attacks, and similar strikes took place both in the south and in the north. By the way, on the territory of the Kursk and Bryansk regions. At that time, naval forces units really were involved. And why the naval forces? Because the Neptune missile is basically a naval missile, an anti-ship missile. And it is in service with the naval forces of the armed forces of Ukraine. Here, we don't hear in the report from the General Staff that units of the naval forces of the armed forces of Ukraine carried out strikes on the oil depot in Shakhtinsk. Here we hear that the missile forces carried out such a strike. Accordingly, there is a strong temptation to say that this is one of those anticipated, long-awaited uses of Ukrainian ballistic missiles. But honestly, I don't know the truth, whether that's the case or not. But I am very willing, let's put it that way, to believe it, because yesterday the issue of ballistics regarding our substance was raised in the pages of the British publication The Times by the head of the President's office, Andriy Yermak, who said that Ukrainian ballistic capabilities, and I quote, are developing very, very well. Everything is going very well. That's what he said, and he promised that there would be surprises for the enemy. In particular, it is quite likely to assume that the Atlas plant was one of those surprises for the enemy, and literally in the very near future. Why is Atlas important? This is a base, as I said, it's an oil depot belonging to the enemy, which essentially supplied fuel to Russian troops in the temporarily occupied territories of Luhansk and Donetsk regions. You can clearly see that Atlas is the shortest supply route for this group of troops in the territory of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, and for supplying them with fuel. As of now, the final consequences of what happened to Atlas are still unknown. There are reports of a fire at the location, but further clarification on the final results is still to come. It is also worth adding that Atlas has not been attacked by our forces for the first time. Previously, it was also struck in August and in November 2024. And now it is June 25. It is quite likely that missiles have already struck this oil depot, the enemy's oil refinery, That's how things stand. In fact, there was an energy truce for some time, but it no longer exists. The enemy is striking Kremenchuk, and we are once again resuming strikes on the enemy's oil depot. This is important news that should be highlighted from yesterday regarding the strikes on the enemy's logistics. Logistics is what our forces are working on right now. As for logistics, well, I did a separate review on this yesterday, a very detailed one. Logistics is everything our forces are working with on the southern front, trying to disrupt the logistics of the Russian troops in the Azov corridor. Here, in fact, on the southern front, the Russians have huge problems because we can actually look at what their supply line is like. For example, the railway between Novakakhovka and Volnovaka, it's a massive, truly gigantic long arm. These are not short supply routes. These are very long supply routes. And along this route at various locations, sometimes near Tokmak, sometimes near Melitopol, sometimes elsewhere, or near Volnovakha, troops carry out various sabotage operations, effectively disabling this whole supply line. And the Russians are suffering significantly because of this. Accordingly, many military analysts and experienced military personnel, when they see that the Russians are confined within this corridor in the south, truly understand that this is nothing short of a nightmare for the enemy. Moreover, this nightmare is intensified by the fact that our long-range drones are operating. Currently, aviation is operating along the frontline areas, but it cannot reach deeper yet because we lack the necessary resources such as cruise missile set, least Storm Shadow or Scalpig, which we could use in the same way Israel does against Iran. But we do have drones that are carrying out these strikes. Aviation is operating along the front line. For example, there is recent footage showing our aircraft using JDAM bombs, French guided aerial bombs in the area of Oleshki. It's a short but very striking video. Let's rewind it to the beginning. Here, these are basically ruins of a building which the enemy was still using as shelter. And right here at this location where Russian personnel were stationed in Oleshki, the JDAMs hit and destroyed it. We actually see plenty of this kind of work from our aviation, both in Zaporizhia and in Kherson region. Aviation is operating very actively in the northern direction, in the area of Kursk region. A bit less actively, but still, less actively in Donetsk region, but they're still making an effort. Why is it less active in Donetsk region? Because here the troop density is extremely, extremely high. But I'll repeat, the main thing our units are doing is disrupting enemy logistics. And drones are contributing a lot in this regard. In general, drones have fantastically and radically changed the scenario and the overall picture of combat operations. I have mentioned this more than once already. In fact, the further we go, the more I've said that I'm basically cutting off the branch I'm sitting on, because these overviews of the battle maps are really losing their relevance, truly losing their relevance. I'm not joking. The OSINT maps like Deep State, are losing their relevance, because now there is no clear understanding or definition regarding, for example, the enemy's advances. There is no clear line of demarcation, no line of contact. There's no longer a situation where this is the red zone and this white zone is ours or the green zone is ours. Now, the boundaries along the line of contact are becoming very blurred precisely because of drones. And one of the examples of this is exactly the Siversk direction. Here, in fact, a very large strip lies in the gray zone. Stretching all the way to the settlement of Khyorivka and even further to Sriblyanka, because the enemy really does reach as far as Sriblyanka. The Deep State team recently dedicated a separate post to all of this, explaining that the enemy's advances and the response by the UAV battalion fighters of the 53rd Mechanized Brigade Signum Battalion are being addressed. And the fact that the enemy is making incursions into Srebrenica does not mean that they have captured it. Well, I previously received information from fighters of the 81st Mobile Brigade, who are also operating in this area, that in reality there is a road here between Bilohorivka, Ryorivka, and Srebrenica. And this road, which basically runs as a transit route through Khyorivka, is actually a general gray zone leading towards Srebrenica, and the enemy is constantly reaching Srebrenica along it. The fighters of the 81st Brigade have been constantly reporting this to me, even a month ago. Essentially bypassing Khyorivka, so to speak, in transit. But this is exactly the hallmark of the current front line of combat. It is a continuous gray zone. That is, despite the fact that this is quite a long stretch, probably about 10 kilometers, maybe less, but it's a large section of the gray zone, which is covered by our drones. And if necessary, if we counterattack, it will be covered by enemy drones as well. That's all. This is how drones have fundamentally changed the war. Overall, they have a very strong impact on logistics. And I never tire of explaining and emphasizing this. They have an effect in the Kostiantynivka direction. The enemy really does have the initiative here. When I hear such statements from colleagues, in particular those saying that it's already possible to talk about stabilization of the situation at the front, or something similar that was written somewhere, I think there was such a report from Finnish intelligence yesterday, the enemy has exhausted its summer offensive. Yes, there are certain signs that the enemy is unable to carry out well. It's not that they're incapable, it's that our troops have adapted. Our drone units are doing everything they can to ensure that the enemy cannot prove otherwise in practice, to prevent them from breaking through the front line. And right now, on none of the fronts knock on wood, we are seeing any breakthroughs. But there is the creation. That is, I want to emphasize that the enemy is incapable. But we can't say that he is already completely exhausted and has halted his advance, because he still has certain prospects. And there is one location, Donetsk region, where he dictates the initiative, where the conditions really favor the enemy. And here, in the Toretsk direction, the Toretsk Kostiantynivka area, it is the enemy who is imposing their initiative. They have made advances here recently. This is in the area of Klishivka, Andrivka, Kurdyumivka. They have made advances in the area of Dakhne-Delivka to the north of Toretsk, right in this location. There is a gradual displacement of our troops from these areas, with slight but steady advances. This direction, the Kostiantynivka-Toretsk axis, is the second most intense after the Pokrovsk direction. And this is an extremely difficult location to defend, because here the defense is happening at 180 degrees with the enemy pressing from three sides. The defense here is taking place under constant threat to our logistical routes, meaning with the enemy advancing toward Alexander Kalinovi and posing a threat to Sherbinivka, Petrivka, and to this group of our forces that is holding on and quite steadfastly maintaining the defense here. And the same goes for other directions as well. What remains almost untouched for now is Chasiv Yar. It's truly amazing how it still stands, even though the enemy is bombarding it daily with glide bombs, artillery, shells, with everything. Well, with everything really, especially with airstrikes. But our positions here in Chasiv Yar are practically unshakable. They remain under our control here. In fact, the enemy hasn't broken through about half of the districts and neighborhoods, especially the northern ones, here in Chasiv Yar. They haven't captured them yet, and actually, well, they might be able to do it, but for now, I'll repeat, it's truly amazing how we've managed to hold Chasiv Yar so far. But around Kostiantynivka, the situation here is actually becoming quite difficult. The second difficult point after Pokrovsk and Toretsk is the Novopavlivka direction. Here too, there are some strange advances by the enemy. In fact, this means the complete capture of the settlements of Oleksivka, which we can talk about, and recent advances in Fedorivka, Vezele, Shevchenko, and Bolatske, as well as in Zaporizhia and Yalta. And these are not cities, but villages in the Donetsk region. And also in the village of Komar, where the enemy seems to have been halted, but we still see these advances. So these finger-like tentacles have spread along the tree lines in the Novopavlivka direction. This propaganda narrative that the enemy is allegedly advancing toward the borders of the Dnipropetrovsk region has stalled. But at the same time, and this actually works in our favor, is also important for the enemy to straighten the front line so that there aren't these kinds of tentacles. Because the more of these bends there are on the front, the more effort is actually required. For example, whether to hold this defensive line or to break through it. Although overall, I'll repeat once again, in broader terms, there is no possibility for the enemy to break through our defenses. And this is demonstrated on absolutely all fronts. You can't call the creation of free tentacles here a breakthrough of the defense, right? Well, you just can't call it that. Here, and here, the creation of tentacles is a breakthrough of defense. No, that's not the case. Just as you can say that the situation in Sumy region is some kind of breakthrough of the defense. Here, the enemy's maximum advance is between 7 and 9 kilometers. And that's basically it. The most difficult situation, I repeat, is in Yunakivka, where the enemy controls more than half of the settlement. But at the same time, in the area of Yablonivka, near Yunakivka, the first footage of our counterattacks and operations is already appearing, and not only with drones, by the way, which is also very notable, but also with tanks. The first tank brigade is operating in this sector. It shows a video of a tank specifically from the Siversk brigade leaving the area of the village of Hrapivshina and firing directly at the tree line with Russian positions in the area between Yablonivka and Yunakivka. And as we can see in the video, later on, after the tank has finished firing, let's first watch how the tank operates. It's basically firing from open ground at the tree lines, shooting at the tree lines. Here are 3 enemy tree lines, 3 enemy positions where the enemy infantry is located. In order not to expose our assault infantry, we can see that the area for the assault is difficult. Of course, you can move along the tree lines, but it's unclear whether they are mined. That's why the soldiers of the Siversk brigade decided to, so to speak, weed these rows with a tank. Well, as you can see, it's a quick, precise, and effective job of eliminating the enemy. We don't know what the consequences are there, but in any case, when a tank fires at the tree lines, very little survives after that. Because from talking to the soldiers, they say that when a tank fires at you, it's the scariest thing you can imagine in your life. So a KAB strike landing somewhere nearby with a huge amount of explosives and a tank. Next, our tankits crew uses a smoke screen, and thanks to this, they managed to avoid FPV drones. And those that do arrive, they don't cause damage to the tank. So that's interesting. But even tanks, despite this crazy drone warfare, still have a certain relevance. And these are actually shots, let's say, of countermeasures, counter pressure in the area of Yablonivka in Sumy region, between Yablonivka and Yunakivka. So these are the shots of those counterattacks that were mentioned earlier. Therefore, to sum up the situation at the front, we can't say that the enemy is exhausted. Yes, in recent days, we've even observed a certain decrease in the number of assaults on the front. Yes, we are observing the need to replenish their losses right now, but this is not yet the last wave that has occurred during the summer-autumn offensive campaign. In other words, the enemy will keep pressing. However, as of today, we have withstood the first onslaught, this 3-week one. On that note, it's probably worth concluding today's review. Thank you for your attention, and I'd like to ask friends to give a like and write comments. Take care of yourselves. Well, all the best, and see you next time.